my dream was having like half screen with me and half screen with Axelson.
A figure from Russell, which is not a circle or a square. Yeah, that's not great.
Okay, we're gonna go for lunch.
Hello and welcome to The Rest is Just Noise, a podcast which is secretly just my personal vendetta against motorcycles in London, because they're horrible and noisy and I hate them. I'm Andrew Mitchell. I'm an acoustician and a soundscape researcher, and I'm joined by my co-host today.
Hi, I'm Francesco Letta. I'm an architect and a soundscape researcher.
And
hi, I'm Tin Obermann. I'm architect, urban planner, and a soundscape researcher.
Which is not a circle or a square. The rest is just noise. So we're all researchers at UCL focused around soundscape. And so today we're going to kind of dig into sort of the foundational basis of how we think about and talk about soundscape. We've discussed on our podcast before in our sort of 0th episode, as well as I think the second one, about how you can measure and quantify perceptual things. So we're going to dig into a concept called the soundscape circumplex, which is what we sort of tend to use. And to help us with that, we're going to bring in our collaborator and another soundscape researcher, Simone Torresin. Hello, Simone.
Hi everyone.
Do you want to say a little bit about sort of where you're based and how you came into soundscape?
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm based in Bolzano, in the northern part of Italy, and I am a PhD student at the University of Trento, together with UKAN research, and I'm collaborating with UCL, with Professor Gianca, Francesco, and you all. And my field of research is on soundscape in indoor spaces, so let's say indoor soundscape.
Cool. Thanks very much. And so we've brought you on because you've sort of replicated some of this soundscape stuff for indoor things. But before we get to that, I want to go sort of all the way back to some of the original psychological research into quantifying perception, because I recently went back and read it because I sort of decided it was important for me to go back to the 70s. So, yeah.
Why not?
Now we play some 70s too.
Oh, yeah. So, I'm actually sort of the least informed on this in the end, but for a little bit of a sort of conceit for the audience, we're going to do this as if I'm explaining to Francesco and Tin how Russell did his thing.
Please do, yes.
So, yeah, I'm gonna be teaching, but you guys are going to correct me as I teach.
We're going to pretend we know what you're talking about.
So let me see if I can find the time. So it's actually not the 70s. I was wrong. It was 1980. A researcher named Russell wanted to verify and extend some previous theories about the affective experience. So how people experience like emotion and affect, and how that can be quantified. And so in order to do this, they used 3 separate methods. And I found this really interesting. The fact that they sort of tried to like triangulate how they were describing these things, and particularly to sort of give a dimensional space to all of these adjectives. So let's start with what they were actually looking at. They were looking at 28 stimulus words, which are these sort of different dimensions of affect. And I'm going to read a couple of them as examples, but I'm not going to go through all 28 because we just don't have the time, and you don't want to hear me read adjectives for the whole time. So for some examples of what adjectives they were presenting to their participants, they've got things like happy, excited, astonished, angry, afraid, frustrated. And then on the sadder side, they've got sad, depressed, gloomy, droopy.
Miserable.
They do have miserable, yeah. And then on the other side, they've got content, satisfied, serene, and calm. And so they've got all these sort of adjectives which describe how someone might be feeling, how their emotions might be expressed. And so they wanted people to sort of arrange these spatially to try and understand how they all relate to each other in this sort of multidimensional way. Because previously to this, literature had treated each dimension as independent, right? So they'd had all these adjectives. They might compress them down to just a few of these adjectives, but they were all considered as independent of each other. And they wanted to understand, how do these relate? Can we start sort of thinking about them in a coherent way as opposed to just rating them all separately? So their first study, they gave all these 28 adjectives and asked the participants to order them on a circular space. They said, place the words around the edge of a circle. And so they were explicitly spatially placing these. So their second one, they were given the same 28 adjectives and asked to sort them into 4, 7, 10, and 13 groups in successive trials. So they, take these 28, group them into 4. Take these 28, group them into 7, etc. And then for the third one, they did what's called unidimensional scaling of the individual 28 terms between pleasure and displeasure, and then also between the degree of arousal, and then plotted it according to those two things. So if you score, for instance, like delighted as high on the pleasure scale and like medium on arousal, that's where they would plot it. And you can see that they kind of already had a sort of dimensional conception to this. They kind of already knew where they were going, which maybe is a little bit of an issue for like a hypothesis testing. Exactly. But in the end, all three of these did sort of come to the same conclusion, which is what we now work with as well. We have these two primary dimensions. On the x-axis, we have pleasure and displeasure, so positive and negative side of it. And then on the y-axis, we have arousal. And I'm actually not sure what the negative side of that would be. They don't really say. But they do arrange it as like the origin at the center. So you have a positive arousal and a negative arousal, and then a positive pleasure and a negative displeasure.
Maybe dead?
Maybe dead.
Yeah, really. I mean, like, what's...
Yeah, like, what's the opposite of arousal? It's, yeah.
I'm alive, I'm not alive. Or
I guess so. But then why wouldn't that just start at 0?
How can you measure the amount of how dead you are?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I can think about a couple of ways, but...
Yeah, I mean, it's like zombie, vampire, stuff like that.
So for our listeners, just be picturing
different undead.
A cross, a like Cartesian plane cross of x and y axis, and arranged around that you have this circle of adjectives, and they are arranged such that when you have positive pleasantness or positive pleasure, I keep saying pleasantness, and we'll get to that for a reason. Positive pleasure, you have things like pleased and content. And then as you go up to the positive y-axis, where it's positive arousal and neutral pleasure, you have something like astonished or alarmed. And then you move to negative x-axis, and you have miserable or distressed, right? And in between all of those, you can set like 45-degree angles, which is a mixture of pleasure and arousal, and have something like excited or delighted. And the idea was that they arrived at this same arrangement in 3 different ways. And they kind of did. Like, they arrived at these primary dimensions from all 3 of them. Something which I will get to in my future research is, it's called a circumplex, and we talk about it as a circle, but that's a bit imposed because that first study asked them to arrange them on a circle. And so some of the other outcomes actually arrange it not so much in a circle, as more like a square, which sits still on the same XY axis, but it's not a circle moving around, it's a square centered on it. But
it's still the same engineering.
Yeah.
Like, there's right or wrong.
Yeah.
There's 90 degrees somewhere.
circle or square.
Yeah.
So I think this is really fascinating, and it really goes to how do you sort of think about these things in a quantifiable way?
Totally fascinating.
And
yeah.
now you have a coordinate system for the emotional effect of, in this case, kind of anything. And that then comes into Soundscape of, I think was it 2010, Axelson and his colleagues said, all right, can we do the same thing for Soundscape? Can we find the correct sort of descriptors and adjectives that apply to Soundscape, and do they fall in this same way? And now we can start talking about the pleasantness or pleasure and arousal of different soundscapes and plot them on this coordinate plane. And it turns out, yes, they could. The adjectives, which let's see if I've got them off the bat. So we'll say first, actually, the in Russell, they took these 28 ones. Once they arranged them, they compressed them down to 8, which represent the primary dimensions and the 45 degrees, right? And so going around, starting from the positive x-axis and going around in a circle, you get pleasure. And then at a 45 degree, which is a mixture of pleasure and arousal, is excitement. Going up to the y-axis, you have arousal. And then continuing around, you have distress at the and misery on the negative x-axis. And then again at the 45, which is a mixture of displeasure and non-arousal, whatever we've decided the negative arousal is depression. And then the negative arousal they call sleepiness, which I guess works.
Yeah.
And then the combination of pleasure and sleepiness is contentment. So those are those sort of like primary descriptors that they've derived out of this. And so in 2010, Axelson came along. We'll talk about the specific method that they used, but they derived for outdoor soundscape the same adjectives going around that circle in a counterclockwise fashion of pleasantness, vibrant, or excitement. I think actually at the time it was excitement.
Lively, exciting.
Yeah. Eventful on the y-axis, chaotic as a mixture of excitement, of eventful and the opposite of pleasant, and then annoying as the opposite of pleasant, monotonous, uneventful, and calm. Right? And so we've got all of these outdoor soundscape ones, and now we can begin to describe these things in this sort of coordinate plane or in terms of these 8 adjectives, and so on and so on. So I find this just wonderful and so useful to be able to talk about things like that. But I want to sort of dig into how Axelson derived this, because they didn't replicate Russell in order to get these descriptors. So in order to tell us more about that, we've got Simone here, who has replicated Axelson's study for indoor soundscape. So he's going to sort of talk us through how his study did this, because it, as I understand it, was basically the exact same way that they did it in 2010.
It's science.
Yes.
Yeah, oh my God, we can replicate things.
We replicate it.
Imagine that. So,
yes, the aim was to describe how to describe the emotional reaction, but to indoor sounds. So basically choosing some stimuli that could represent a typical indoor soundscape in residential buildings, and we targeted a living room. So we furnished the acoustics lab at Hearley's in London, like a sort of living room, and we proposed 20 different scenarios by combining 4 types of indoor sounns and 5 types of outdoor sounds that have been recorded in any case in real indoor environments with semi-open windows to different types of urban environments, ranging from more pleasant one, like a garden with birds, to really annoying ones with heavy traffic and sirens, or just a light traffic. And we also had 2 control conditions, which no sound was released. And then we had some indoor sound, focusing on sound generated in the room where the listener was located. So television, radio, this kind of things, or fan noise from ventilation.
So you're trying to simulate all these different scenarios where you have a mix of indoor and outdoor sounds, and you can sort of control some of them, and others are coming in through different types of windows and that sort of stuff.
Exactly. The person was just sitting in a sofa, imagining being in a living room with a semi-open windows, with different types of sounds coming from this window. In the test, in this laboratory experiment, it was just a huge display with a window view. The window view was always the same, not to introduce a further variable. And then we had also television with another visual input that was the same through all the tests.
So the television was like the focal point, right? It was
Yes.
It was what the people were supposed to be sort of, if you're sitting in your living room, you're focused on your TV, but you've got the window next to you, so you can see some outdoor. Yeah.
Then you had 1 minute just to listen to each of these 20 acoustic combinations, acoustic scenario. And then during the following minutes, while listening to a repetition of the stimuli, they had to rate 97 attributes. And those attributes were also different from those used by Axelson's experiment, because we focused on adjectives that could be representative of describing an atmosphere in an indoor setting.
So what they had done was all of these similar sort of thing of view is all these different acoustic scenarios for outdoor settings.
Yes.
And then this set of, did they have 97 as well? It was somewhere around
116.
116.
Yeah.
Of adjectives that they thought might describe those outdoor settings, and just have people rate all of the sounds on all of those 116, and then in your case, 97 selected adjectives.
So the
right?
design was actually slightly different, because I think Simone asked participants to rate all of them, which is why the experiment was so long.
Yeah.
But in Axelson's case, it was actually different. So each participant was actually only assessing and rating a subset of those.
Oh.
So this would have some implications in terms of analysis, but
so each person didn't rate every single thing.
In Axelson's case, no.
But in Simone's,
yeah,
everybody was rating all 97.
Exactly.
I do remember doing that. Actually.
Yeah, exactly. And I was participant as well. And I was, yeah,
because your study was actually conducted in the room that we're recording our podcast right now, which is our lab here at UCL, and I think all three of us were participants at some point.
I mean, if you want to call us participants, I usually use victims, but it's a matter of perspective. But yeah.
All right. So yeah, we are presented with all of these scenarios, and we rate it on the 97 adjectives. So where do you go from there?
Then we, in the same way Axelson did, we just applied a principal component analysis. So we extracted the just few basic dimensions that could describe the most of the variance in the data we collected from our participants. We had 35 participants, and we found that this emotional reaction to our sounds could be explained mainly by two orthogonal dimensions. The first was related to comfort. So it was comfort, annoyance, comfortable, annoying continuum. And the second one was related to content. So it was an empty, full of content continuum that reminds, is similar to eventfulness.
Yeah.
But what was most interesting was were the secondary dimensions, because
those 45-degree angle ones, right? The combination of the two. And we should say a principal component analysis is a type of analysis that essentially takes all of the variance across these 97 different dimensions and tries to combine them to sort of bring it down and determine the principal ones, like along which dimensions do these mostly vary along with each other. And so those dimensions are unnamed at the end of the analysis, and so you then create a name by looking at where the original questions, the original dimensions you asked, fall along those principles, right? So you found a principle one, you plot, and you see, oh, all of these questions that we asked around comfort align along this x-axis.
Yes. So, for instance, comfortable dimension was named like this because adjectives related to being in a comfort condition score most on that direction.
But Russell and PCA, that's something else.
Well, I don't. Did PCA exist in 1980 for Russell, or at least at a scale that anyone could actually use? Now we have really nice, programming libraries to do it. I don't know if that's why they did it in this more sort of, I guess, manual way.
Yeah, empirical.
Yeah. Whereas Axelson and then now Simone have done it with the sort of using these, I guess it counts as machine learning statistical tools to derive these correlations and correlated variances and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, so you've come out now with comfort and content, the degree of content, which are kind of analogous to the outdoor ones of pleasantness and eventfulness, but sort of subtly different. So then what were the secondary ones? What were these 45-degree axes that you came out with?
So one was related to the fact that the indoor soundscape was more or less engaging for the task. So a comfortable and full-on content living room resulted engaging, while an annoying and empty indoor soundscape was described as detached. And this is, again, more or less similar to the outdoor case. But even more interesting was the other secondary axis. So when this living room was comfortable and empty, it resulted private and controlled, under control. So we have this privacy dimension that is, I would say, really peculiar of your own house, your own living room. And then on the opposite side, when you have an annoying and full-on content living room, you find this indoor soundscape as really intrusive and uncontrolled. And
so, Simone, what would be the equivalent then for the outdoor one? Because, of course, as you mentioned, control and privacy and things, this is something that you would expect in your private space, right, in your living room.
Yes.
But then, and that's the reason why such dimensions would not be so relevant for outdoor. Mm-hmm. So what would be the equivalent in the outdoor? That would be the calmness, yes.
Calmness instead of private and under control, and chaotic instead of intrusive and uncontrolled.
So that's kind of interesting that the primary dimensions of like comfort and content sound really very close to the outdoor ones, pleasant and eventful. Those are pretty closely like analogous to each other. But then once you start combining them, that's where you really see the sort of difference between an indoor and an outdoor. Because private versus, sorry, what did you say the other side was? Like out of control or intrusive?
Yeah. Intrusive.
Private and intrusive. That's quite different from calm and chaotic, right?
I was kind of also rooting for the uninhibited and prohibited and things like that, because if you are really in your own space, you feel like you could do anything there and nobody can see you and you don't care. So that would be like the full of content
and comfort.
And comfort, yeah.
So very comfortable and full of content could be uninhibited.
Yeah, but that one didn't
make it through the PCA. Luckily, luckily it didn't make it.
But yeah, that's really interesting that once you get these sort of combinations of the principal dimensions, which seem quite similar, then you start to really diverge from outdoor soundscape.
Yes, and it was nice to see how these 20 conditions were plotted into this bidimensional space. So have a look at what scored more intrusive or more engaging or quite private. And at the end, it all made really sense because, for instance, listening to the TV sound without any sound from the outside was really private and under control, while having natural sounds or music was really engaging. Or
Yeah, where did the silence condition fall?
the fully silent condition, so no sound from indoor and no sound from outdoor, was just slightly comfortable, but rather neutral and really empty. So it was not the best, the most comfortable condition.
Mm-hmm.
It was rather
I remember
neutral,
hating
but
it.
as you can, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty common thing that we tend to comment on is that, you know, sort of more traditional noise approaches tend to sort of place silence as like the goal, you know. Even if we never reach it, that's what we are shooting for. But really, very few people actually find silence comfortable, which is, you know, a sort of common trope about like anechoic chambers, which I don't always.
Which are terrible. I mean, it's always
Yeah.
talked like how anechoic chambers are terrible to be in for a longer time. But actually, the lab is not anechoic, but still, there was a slight tendency towards comfort in that condition, which I find very.
It's just because London is so noisy. You can
maybe.
finally appreciate a bit of silence.
I didn't.
It is nice.
But maybe for longer times. Yeah.
I hated it. But,
Yes, it was not really. It was just neutral, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Slightly comfortable, but rather neutral. While
But
those
mostly
with
empty.
music,
Yeah.
yes, really empty, but rather neutral as regards comfort.
And so then there's something we didn't mention in Axelson's work of the third dimension, right? So the two primary dimensions they discovered of pleasantness and eventfulness, but there's a third one, which is familiarity in the outdoor soundscape. So did you find anything like that? Did you find a third dimension which sort of relates to that?
The third dimension was also described as familiarity, so how much familiar the indoor soundscape was, but could just explain a reduced part of the variance. So it was not really a really important dimension as for the case of Axelson's experiment.
Yeah, I think in Axelson it was like 8% described by familiarity. And I would say, I think...
because it's a very vague concept indeed. I mean, what do you mean by
I
familiar?
think it makes more sense for the outdoor case, right? Because it's not your own space, right? So it's like, you know, how familiar is this selection of spaces which aren't mine?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the indoor case, maybe like a little bit of a critique here, maybe it doesn't actually make sense for your study because it wasn't their space either, right? Like the sounds you presented aren't my living room, so there is a question about familiarity. Whereas when you're actually talking about someone's living room, it just is familiar.
But then also, I mean, the third dimension is there because PCA can do it, right?
But we don't need it.
And
Which we ignore in Axelson all the time anyway. We never talk
because
about familiarity.
did Russell do it? No.
Russell only had a two-dimensional.
Yeah, so it kind of makes you think about all the things you try to like fit your findings in when you have the tools or when you don't. It's
That's true.
Perhaps some like a researcher's bias or
No,
the wrong term. Sorry.
that was sarcastic. Research is perfectly objective, particularly when we're talking about, you know, perception. Actually, that's a question. So, did you include the outdoor, like those 8 adjectives that we use in outdoor soundscape? Did you include that in your list of 97 attributes?
I think some of them, yes.
Because I would have been interested, like, sort of how those come out. Actually, I've got the figure here. So
there are some.
There are, but it was interesting. For instance, eventful or eventfulness, uneventful, located in slightly different location. That's why we call full of content and empty instead.
But
Because also calm, for instance, in our case was much more related to comfort. Yes, also safety. So the single attributes were located in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
Axelson's ones, they came from visual adjectives.
Yeah, from aesthetics, basically.
He did a study in aesthetics and looking at what's photographs, black and white, different kinds of photographs.
Yeah.
That's also a difference for your study. I think in Axelson they didn't have any visual component. It was just the sounds, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then yours, you've got this visual component of like trying to put people in the mindset of
Context.
you were in a living room. Okay, so I guess
we also in a similar way we pick up the attributes also from studies on the description of the visual atmosphere in living rooms. So it was also very similar to what Axelson did.
So then this might be a slightly difficult question. So as you sort of dug in and replicated and went through the whole process of doing the same sort of analysis, do you have any sort of critiques of particularly Axelson's work on this? Because it now underlies a huge portion of Soundscape research. And we should always be questioning whether the tool that we're using is really accurate. So is there anything as we're using it that we should really be thinking about as we're applying it, of like deficiencies in how it was derived?
Well, the fact that the two main dimensions were appeared again in two really different conditions of sounds and of attributes make us more or less confident that at least the base structure we use to measure this emotional response to sounds, both indoor or outdoor, is quite valid. For sure, there are some limitations related to the use of principal component analysis. First of all, you just can extract the components related to what you have included. So what you are asking, maybe we're ignoring aspects.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, if you miss something in your list of adjectives, you were never going to find it anyway. And then I think a similar thing is, we say this is the pleasant dimension, which, yes, but the specific word which was chosen for that, and the same thing in yours of choosing comfort as the thing, like, it seems to best describe all of the sort of lower level adjectives which clustered around there, but which particular word you choose could sort of bias how people respond to it. I'm thinking particularly in Axelson of choosing, in the outdoor soundscape, of choosing something like eventful or monotonous, which aren't the most obvious to a lot of people, and so they may not interpret it in the way that sort of the theory says they should.
Yes. Also, in our case, we had in some case to choose two adjectives, like in the private control, because only one could not be enough to express this cloud of attributes that were located there. And yes, in any case, when you ask people with a reduced number of items, I think this problem is always present.
Yeah. So then, Francesco.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention because, full disclosure, I'm a great fan of Axelson's model and Simone's work, and so I would use that as a theoretical framework in any case. But from my point of view, there is a more fundamental issue about this, which is, so basically we have to keep in mind that we extract these dimensions and we get them from listening experiments, right? So we ask people to actively listen to something that we expose them to, and that may not necessarily reflect how people experience sounds, acoustic environments in real life. And that's particularly true because when you take these scales, these adjectives and these dimensions that you extract and you bring it to the field, basically into the wild, and you test them, you notice that people, for example, tend to you don't end up usually, for example, with monotonous soundscapes. And that's because basically, if a soundscape was monotonous, probably you were not paying attention to it. So when you force people to listen to something that is
They always
supposedly
find
monotonous,
something.
yeah, either they always find something.
Brain always finds something
The attention
to listen
makes
to.
it
attention.
more-
So the listening style, whether it's attentive listening or holistic listening or passive listening, whatever you want to call it, that makes a difference in how you then score it. And for this reason, I've been reading stuff from also Botte Doren's group in Belgium. They are trying to challenge this kind of models and set it around a saliency-driven thing rather than this kind of circumplex approach. Because first of all, you should define how you're listening and whether something is noticeable or not. And once you have identified the sound source or sound environment as being noticeable, therefore you recognize it, after that you process it.
And saliency in this case is sort of like forced attention.
Exactly.
It's a sound which, you aren't directing your attention to, it is drawing your attention.
Exactly.
And so that gets away from the sort of problem that you're raising of once you ask people to focus on and pay attention to a soundscape, it changes their perception of it.
Exactly. So one of the assumptions of the circumplex model is that basically all the dimensions are working at the same layer, and so there's no kind of hierarchy among them. While maybe when we listen, our brain, when we listen into, during real life, we process information differently and so on. So that's one of the main critiques I've been reading about in general. But yeah.
So we've kind of gone quite into the weeds now. We've gone into sort of our thinking about this sorts of thing as people who work with and think about this way too much. So to sort of bring it back into a more practical realm for our listeners, Simone, what's the next step? What's the next thing for indoor soundscape? Is it, you've done this for residential? Is it moving on to other contexts? Is it making use of this in residential stuff? What are you working on
One
now?
thing to say, I mean, it already got its application in practice.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, Apex Acoustics are using the model.
Okay, Simone, you can send them an invoice then. you can charge them.
Yes, it has been nice to see Jack Harvey Clark using this model, incorporating this model in their questionnaire. And we have also included into an online survey we have done during this COVID lockdown, both in London and in Italy. And we have gathered interesting data and results you will hopefully soon see. And next step, well, in this model, we just used indoor sounds and outdoor sounds, no neighbor noise. The person was just alone, sitting alone, so no, let's say, party, no really engaging situation.
When we will get noise complaints, all residential, all talking about your neighbors. Yeah.
So next step will be to go to apply this into real buildings. So let's try to do a monitoring campaign to pair objective and subjective data to gather also some results that can be then used to model and predict and improve our residential buildings. I will focus still focused on residential buildings.
But that's, I mean, the thinking specifically about the neighbor sounds, it seems like you may have, like, your model will work for that, right? Because you've got that intrusiveness dimension.
We could hypothesize that the same effect we get from unwanted sounds from outdoors, it will work the same for the neighboring noises, despite the different frequency response, I guess.
I think it would be more about recognizing the different source. Yeah. Is it traffic noise or is it people?
Can I shout at them or not? So that's the difference.
That's the thing about control. You have a bit more control over your neighbors than you do over the highway.
You can go and complain. You can yell at the highway, which is funny. I often do.
Anyway, so Yeah. The indoor soundscape model I think is super exciting and super useful. And talking about Apex Acoustics using it, in my consulting work, we were working on some indoor office soundscape stuff before you would come out with this, and the whole time in that I was saying to them, this isn't really right. We're using the outdoor soundscape like Circumplex, these adjectives. It's not really right. You need to wait like 6 months
Yeah.
until the indoor one comes out and then use that. And I think they are taking that on board, and as they move forward with that, they're going to be using your indoor soundscape. So it's super exciting to sort of have better tools for bringing all the stuff we're doing outdoor into an indoor space. So Simone, thank you so much for joining us and having this sort of extended conversation about the Circumplex and Axelson. Is there sort of any last little bit you'd like to say, or anything you'd like to plug about, I don't know, where people can find more about your work, anything like that?
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, this work has been described in a paper in Building and Acoustics if you want to read more about this. But
and we'll link it. We'll
yes.
link it in the show notes and descriptions and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for this really nice conversation.
All right. Thanks very much,
Thank you, Simone.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.
And cut.
So now we can say something really interesting.
Yeah.
To actually use.
Something actually interesting.
No, I mean like.
The rest is just noise.
You can find episodes of The Rest is Just Noise on all of your usual podcast apps.
And on our website at justnoisepod.com. We're also on Twitter as @justnoisepod.
The Rest is Just Noise is supported by the UK Acoustics Network.